All right, we're good to go.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Amy Colbert is a professor of management and entrepreneurship at the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa, where she teaches classes on leadership. She is also the faculty director of Tippie's social impact community, which helps organizations solve society's most pressing problems. The SIC is a hub for scholars across disciplines who are passionate about helping organizations and individuals build a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient society. From environmental sustainability to health and well-being, social justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She earned a PhD in organizational behavior and human resource management from the University of Iowa and is interested in the ways that individuals connect with their work, their coworkers, their supervisors, and their organizations in ways that motivate and sustain them. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Amy.
Thank you, Keegan. I appreciate the nice introduction. Thank you, Carlette and Maddie, for organizing, and to all of you for being here. I've been looking forward to this for several reasons. First, I was asked to talk about authentic relationships at work. This is something that I've been researching for a long time, and I am the beneficiary of so many good workplace relationships that I have valued throughout my career as an academic. But even before that, I was a public accountant. I worked as a tour guide. I've had a lot of careers, and I know that the people that I've worked with have made my experiences better in a number of ways. And so we're going to talk about that today. It's the subject of some current research that I'm doing with one of our graduate students here at Tippie, Madison Mucci Ferris. And so I may ask you a few questions to inform some of the research that we're doing, and we'll share that back with Madison. I'm also thrilled to be here today because I love librarians, honestly. I've gotten the chance to do some development work with the State Library Association. I did a program called Librarians on the Loose for city librarians about connecting outside of the library and building connections in that way. They made me a poster, which looked like a horror movie poster. And so it had my picture on it, loved it. I was on the West Branch Library Board for a number of years, and I appreciate the work that all of you do so much. So when Carlette reached out and asked if I would do this, I was like, absolutely, a small thing I can do to give back to a group that has done so much for me. So thank you for being here. You do this regularly, and so you likely have norms about raising your hand or coming off mute or using the chat. I will tell you that I am comfortable with all of those. We are a small enough group that I will manage that and try to keep an eye on the chat, although sometimes I forget to multitask. So if I'm ignoring your question, please just come off mute and ask me. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable having your video on, seeing faces is always nice for me. I teach an online MBA class as well, and so I like the kind of back and forth that I can get when I see people's faces. But I also do a lot of committee and service work here at the university and spend a lot of my time on Zoom, and know that sometimes I just don't want to or can't be on camera. And so that is okay as well. So especially when we're discussing, though, if you can come on to turn on your cameras so that we can have some cross conversation, that might be effective. I've got a plan for today, although I tend to do a lot of this kind of work. At Tippie, we do a lot of non-degree executive education in corporations around Iowa. So I go out and I'll do either virtually or in person 3 hours on this, 5 hours on this, and I'm pretty good at, I promise I won't go 5 hours today. I know our timeline, but I'm pretty good at tailoring based on the questions and the needs of the group. So feel free to turn me a little bit if that is helpful. But I'll show you what my plan is for today, and then I'm going to tee up something that I'd like to do at the end so that you can be thinking about it. So today I want to talk about authentic work relationships, and we'll start with some definition. What are authentic work relationships? How is it that we build these in the workplace? So what do they look like, especially when we're talking about work relationships as opposed to non-work relationships? We'll talk about the benefits of authentic work relationships, and I hope to be able to convince you using a lot of research that having strong workplace relationships is good for us in terms of our well-being and our productivity. And honestly, as somebody in the College of Business, I care a lot about both of those outcomes. I don't actually care that much about organizational profit, which makes me a little bit of an oddball here in the College of Business. But I do care about people and individuals. I was trained as a psychologist, and I really believe that organizations can put together systems that help people be both well and productive at the same time. And so we'll talk a lot about that. And then we'll talk about the how. How do you build, how do you maintain these authentic work relationships? To the extent that you're willing to share, that will make the session even more rich. And so I'll ask some questions and hopefully pull you into some conversations. But I'll share some examples with other groups that I've done this presentation for as well. I did a webinar along with a community psychologist that's on the Tippie College of Business YouTube page on authentic work relationships. So if you want more after this session, that's a place that I would direct you to as well. I'm going to shift through a bunch of slides really quickly to take you to the end so that we can think a little bit about what we're going to do at the wrap up of the session. When I did the webinar, we asked people for questions in advance. It was a group, it was hundreds of people. We couldn't just pop on and ask questions. So I have 5 scenarios from that session that I've put in at the end that we can discuss. So these kind of very specific practical tips that I hope that we'll be able to get to. Things like, how do you build authentic relationships when you join a new team? Or if you're working remotely, if you're doing most of your work in interacting over Zoom or Teams, how do we build authentic relationships then? How do you find the time? Everybody is trying to do more with less. My leadership students tell me that is their biggest challenge. And so I think that there's the opportunity to think about, how do we do this even if you're short-staffed? How do we do this across differences, whether it's generational differences or background differences of other sorts? And then how do you create environments that support this in the broader workplace? Those are questions that came up from the webinar audience, and I've left those in here because I think they're good specific questions. But throughout the session, please feel free to put other scenario kinds of questions into the chat, and I'll substitute yours in first. So if you've got a burning question about authentic work relationships, especially given the context in which you're working, please put it in the chat and we'll talk through that. I'm a believer that we can learn a lot from research evidence about how to work effectively, but I also know that context matters a lot. I luckily share some of your context here at the university, and so I know a little bit about the context that you're facing, but I want you to put in questions that will help us make sure we're focusing on contexts that are useful to you. Does that make sense? And do you have any questions about our plan for today? Sounds good. All right. I am going to flip backwards then and start with our definition of authentic workplace relationships. In general, when we study authentic relationships, whether at work or in other contexts, we're talking about genuine connections, right? So genuine connections I think of as connections in which you can be yourself. Right? Connections in which you are able to bring your whole self to the relationship. This requires a couple of things. It requires mutual self-disclosure. It requires people to be honest about who they are and disclose and to be open to hearing about other people as well and who they are. And it also requires open and supportive responses to those disclosures. So when we get those conversations going back and forth and we have those honest connections, that's what I would call an authentic work relationship. Questions about that or anything you would add to the definition? So let me ask you this, and I got my flu shot yesterday, so I'm sure now I have a little bit of antibodies coming up. So if I start coughing, I'm going to try really hard to mute. I've gotten good at that. But let me ask you this. Do you see any downsides to this? What are the potential problems with being authentic at work? And again, feel free to come off mute or pop things in the chat.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I really like your definition of authentic work relationships. And I've read a bit about that through Brene Brown's work. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if that definition remains the same across ethnic cultural groups.
That's a great question. And there is a little research, but not a lot of research about that. What do you think, Carlette? What brought that question to mind for you?
Because as a person of color, I'm very mindful of what I say, how I say it, and within what context I'm communicating, because I don't want to be misunderstood or perceived in a negative way. And there's lots of literature that states some of our interactions can be perceived as aggressive, stereotypical, and we don't want those kinds of interactions to impact our relationships with others. So being authentic is kind of difficult from that perspective.
Yes, it's such a good point, and it's consistent with some of the comments that are in the chat as well about needing to be vulnerable if we're having authentic relationships and being concerned about biases. I tend to think of authentic relationships not as it is or it isn't, but it's on a spectrum. And we can be more or less authentic depending on the situation. I'm going to propose that there may be situations where you choose to hide some of yourself, right? To keep some of that to yourself so that you are able to fit into a context, right? I work in a business college. I am a psychologist. I spend a lot of time, especially on interdisciplinary committees, speaking language that is not my own, but that will resonate with others. And so as we think about doing that, sometimes we do that strategically. However, the research would suggest that that can be exhausting if you don't have a space where you can be a little bit more authentic. There's an old sociologist named Irving Goffman that calls this backstage, right? I am not fully authentic with my students. I don't always tell them everything that's going on in my world, but I need to be able to come back into my departmental offices and have some folks that I can share the broader me with. So I think about that as finding those spaces, those backstages where you can be more authentic. But Catherine's comment in the chat, completely agree. Stereotypes make it very difficult to be vulnerable. I would agree. Thanks for that question, Carlette. I think that's something that we'll weave in throughout the presentation, and I encourage you to jump back in to comment on that. Yeah,
thank you.
Other questions or challenges that you can see with this? I do have colleagues who will sometimes say, this is work, right? Leave the other parts of you at the door, come in, and then be your work self. And vulnerability and authenticity can happen in other contexts. I've had two experiences lately that I feel like have made me push back against that fairly hard. One is both of my kids went away to college. I became an empty nester. It's very difficult for me to leave that at the door, especially walking into a university workplace, right? So I see the students around me. I think about my own. There's not a strict boundary either. My kids text me. They will be texting any minute now, probably, right? So it's midterm week for my son, Matt, and I get messages from him. And so for me to say, okay, I'm going to leave Mother Amy at the door and come in and be Professor Amy is absolutely impossible. It became even more difficult a couple of years ago during 2020 when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I have fairly early stage Parkinson's disease with a wonderful, wonderful care team here at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinic. So most of my work proceeds just as expected, but not always. I'm not as quick with the mouse as I used to be. So if I go on mute and don't come off, sometimes that happens a little bit more slowly for me. That's a piece that I just simply cannot leave at the door. That comes with me. And so I think that in workplaces where we can create environments that allow people to bring their full selves to work, it reflects what is naturally happening, right? We can't separate ourselves and leave ourselves at the door. And where people aren't able to do that, it's depleting, right? It's exhausting. To put on a mask and play the role is something that we've all done at certain points, but it really does make us less able to do our jobs because of the depletion. Julie's comment here, I think, is especially spot on. It creates a hostile work environment when you're using somebody's authenticity against them, or even simply not allowing that to have a space to emerge. Not every space, not every time, but a space to emerge. So I'm kind of selling already why I think authentic work relationships are important. Let me ask you, why do you think authentic work relationships are important? Why did you come to the session today?
So I think this relates to that. There was a question from someone in the chat to ask anonymously about, can there be too much openness when we are authentic, especially between supervisor and supervisees? How do you manage that kind of hierarchy, the need to have boundaries and critical response while still maintaining authenticity?
Yes, absolutely. And I think almost everything that we study about people at work, there are these tensions, right? We're managing these tensions. That calls out a really important tension. Do you want to be fully open always? No, there are some things that you may want to keep to yourself, right? Again, I would recommend, if you have a space where you can be fully open, whether at work or outside of work, it may help you manage that. But choosing the relationships in which you feel you can be more and less authentic may be a way to manage and balance that. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about how to form and maintain authentic work relationships. There are some relationships where you may be more vulnerable, more open, and more authentic than others. Yeah, good. Other thoughts on this? Why are authentic work relationships important? I'm loving the comment in the chat. There's no way we can leave personal problems at the door. And that's especially true given your family situation. I had both of my kids when I was a PhD student here at Iowa. So I started my first academic job at the University of Notre Dame with 2 kiddos under the age of 3. And thinking that I could go in for 8 to 10 hours and be an assistant professor and forget about them was hard. It was made easier in my situation because my husband decided to stay home and he was the primary caregiver at that time. So I was in some way the person who was able to say, nope, I've got an at-home spouse, right? Which has traditionally been the purview of the men in the career paths. But I was able to do that a bit. But even so, I think psychologically, we bring that with us. Yeah, I like, again, comments in the chat. Authentic work relationships can enhance trust and understanding. Yes, and make it so much easier to get our work done when we are honest. And we're going to talk about that. Catherine, I see your hand. Please jump in.
Yeah, you just sort of mentioned what I was thinking. If we can't be authentic at work, it's hard to get anything done, because we're always second guessing the other people we're working with and trying to think, well, what are they really thinking about this? And yeah, I just think it interferes with progress and decision making sometimes.
Yes. And if we are honest, and sometimes this might not be about our deepest selves, but about our skills and abilities. I am working with a graduate student right now who is very gracious about not wanting to use a lot of my time. And so I'll run the analysis. I've got this, but really didn't have the skills that I thought she had. And so she worked for hours and hours and hours before I finally uncovered that there was a small thing that she didn't understand about the analysis. Had she been open and said, I don't know how to do this, we would have saved a lot of time, right? And so sometimes it's even as small as our skills and abilities and being honest about those. I think that makes a big difference as well. There is something about experience too. It improves mental health and morale to know that there are people you look forward to seeing each day at work. There's an item on the Gallup organization measure of employee engagement that I don't love, but the item predicts outcomes very well. And that item is, I have a best friend at work. Kind of makes me feel like I'm back in third grade. I'm like, best friend, I'm not sure. But I do like the idea of, I have a connection at work. I have a relationship where I can be myself. That makes me feel much better able to handle the day, to do the work, but also happier about being at work, productivity and well-being. And so I think that's important as well. And then there's more comments. Maddie's comment, I think, is important as well. It's not always possible to completely peel away our authentic selves without losing our minds or burning out. And I think that is absolutely true. We saw this a lot during COVID. The picture on the slide that I'm sharing right now is not a stock image. This is a picture of my family on a rafting trip. So I am one of those yellow helmets in there. I had almost fallen out just previously to this, but this has become my image of how I felt sometimes during COVID at work. Right? There was so much going on and so much new that I was trying to figure out, and so much that I was the department chair at the time. And so my employees were all dealing with the challenges that they had around health and family and schooling at home, in addition to trying to keep our students moving forward. And in the midst of all of that, I felt a lot like I was in the middle of the rapids. And I can tell you that in those situations, it is really difficult to think, right? I was not, if you'd given me a simple math problem, I probably couldn't have solved it. And I'm a math major as an undergraduate, right? Like, I've got some skill. In the middle of these rapids, couldn't do it. But that gentleman in the back, I really wasn't doing anything at all. He was doing everything. And at the end of the day, I realized that when you're in that deep water, right, when you're in the rapids, having those authentic connections where you can be honest about what you're experiencing enables you and others around you to do your work well. Human connection is just simply a key driver of health and happiness. There's some research that suggests that being lonely is worse for our health than smoking cigarettes, right? So having connection has implications for our health and our well-being. And on the positive side, I would say, when you do have those genuine human connections, it can be a real source of joy. It can be a privilege. When I have a student who comes in and shares something with me authentically, I feel like that's a gift. That is part of why I love what I do. And when I was department chair, I got to do that with my colleagues as well. I saw a person speak at the Diversity Awards a year or so ago here at the University of Iowa. Her name is V. Fixmore Arrays, and she's a supervisor at Johnson County. And she said, there's something so profound in allowing people to be who they are. And I do think that if we're able to do that in our relationships and to do that for others, that is a profound experience that can really create a connection that it is impossible to create without that. So I do think that work is a source of stress, and these relationships can be a buffer, especially when you have to work with customers, patients, students. For all of you, I'm sure faculty aren't always the easiest. And sometimes having that backstage, that place where you can be yourself, is what will really help. I do think it's important to think about the various kinds of support we get from people as well, because that may influence the types of relationships that we want to make sure that we have at work. As we've been saying, this doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be best friends with everyone that we work with, but it is good to have supportive relationships. So I want you to take a minute, think about a time when someone supported you at work. And I'm intending that to be really, boy, I hate Zoom, really broader than my Zoom window, right? So think about a time when someone supported you at work, and I'm going to ask you what that person did for you. I did this as a research study now it's been about 7 years ago, with a couple of colleagues, Joyce Bono from the University of Florida and Ina Pravatnavana from Drake University. And we ask a lot of people this question to try to understand the kinds of support we get from good work relationships. Has somebody got one that you want to share? This can be really quick, popcorn style. Just turn on your mic and tell me about the support that you've received from other people at work.
Both times when I came back from maternity leave, my supervisor got flowers and a card, like knowing that it was just a tough transition. There wasn't necessarily anything to be done, but just like, hey, I'm here for you. I know it's tough. So it was just a nice moment of being seen.
Yes. Boy, I'm going to pull that out. Being seen, right? We're going to talk a lot about that. It's powerful. Good. What else? And if you're more chat box people, feel free to use that as well.
Sometimes I think that support can look more like just sharing a funny story. Because if I'm having a hard day at work or I'm just feeling stressed and overwhelmed and somebody stops by and tells me something random, then it often brings me a lot of joy. And then I continue with my day and it just brings a lot of light to my day.
Yes. And these are the kinds of examples that we heard over and over. Memes are good gifts. Absolutely. I have several text threads that are beautiful at doing this virtually, even, right? But having somebody in person stop by, and it might happen at a moment where you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. We talked about burnout as this possible outcome. How do we avoid that? And so being the person who can come by and just add a little light and life to the situation, I think that's so important. When someone listened, didn't judge, right? So often I think we feel as though we need to help people solve their problems. That's actually not always what they want. It's actually not always possible. But listening and listening without judgment, we're going to talk about mindful listening, and I'm going to give you a resource on that because I've found that to be so useful for me in working with colleagues and with students as well. I love this from Julie. So many examples that I'm having trouble picking one. And this is why occasionally I've been using a new journal lately, and it has a gratitude log in it. And I'm just like every day filling in my little spiral of these things happened. And if I didn't stop to pause, maybe I wouldn't even really think about them, but they are gifts, every single one of it. It's improved my mental health so much to know that I'm supported and seen as a human here. Wow, that's powerful too. When someone supported a decision I made in a situation with no perfect answers, right? I don't think we know what's right or wrong here, but I felt supported. I felt like I was given the opportunity to make the decision and then the support to carry it out. That can be very powerful as well. Good. Keep popping others in the chat as you think about them. I love the indications of support that I see in this climate. There are a number of people, though, that we talked to when we were doing this research that are lonely at work. And that number has only increased during COVID. So if you're a person who's sitting there thinking, boy, I wish I had more of this, we're going to talk about that as well, because it's very easy to get into a situation where you're like, oh, I think everybody else is getting this and I'm not. That is not true. There are a number of people who are experiencing loneliness and lack of support, and how to deal with that is something that we'll cover. When we did our research, we really focused in on 4 broad categories of functions of work relationships. One of them is pretty straightforward, and I think you may not even think about this one. It's the task support. It's the things people do when they're collaborating together, helping get the work done, or helping me make sense of the organization, especially as we onboard new employees, helping them understand that the university can be a very confusing place, right? And how does all of this fit together? And what does this acronym mean? In the Tippie College of Business, we have an acronym sheet that we hand out to new employees. And I still refer back to it because I'm not sure I've gotten them all down. So these are the kind of things that I think naturally happen in the context of collaborative work. Sometimes we get support by people thinking about our growth and our development. We heard a lot about personal development, people who just helped me become a better person. But a lot of it in our context, in the work context, was related to career development, providing advice, providing resources, giving me opportunities, supporting my decisions when I made a decision. All of those things can help us advance in our careers, become better at what we do. The third type of support that we found in our research was emotional support. These are the people who help you cope with stress and burnout. Sometimes it's listening. Sometimes it's responding with a specific kind of support, but it's almost always non-judgmental. Sometimes it's just giving you a chance to vent, right? Not having to solve the problem. And then finally, we found that the fourth function of work relationships was friendship. We do have people at work who we consider friends. I realized after I put this definition in the slide, it's a research definition, which makes friendship sound very awful and boring. I was like, oh my gosh, voluntary informal relationships with communal norms. I'm going to change that. I'm going to find a quote. If anybody's got a good quote about friends, let's put that and replace it. But there has been a lot of academic research done in this idea that we have relationships where we're looking out for each other. That's the communal norms part, right? You care about me and I care about you. And it's more than just because we work together. I care about you as a human. When I feel seen as a human here, I'm going back to that quote from the chat, I feel like I have friends. I feel like I have people who are supporting me, and that is mutual. There's some mutuality to that. But here's where I'm going to go back to authentic work relationships. To get those kinds of support, I'm going to suggest that you need to be open about things about yourself. So if you're going to get task support, if you're going to get help with work in ways that are useful to you, you have to be honest with the people around you about the things that you feel are strengths and the things that are weaknesses, the things you don't understand, and the ways in which you might need to develop to be able to do your work more effectively. So for self-disclosing, those task-related kinds of things make it more likely that you're going to get excellent task support. Career-related self-disclosure is necessary for career development. This may not always be with your boss, right? I was department chair for 4 years. I stepped out after I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I worked with a lot of faculty members and talked to them about their career goals. And it was about 6 days after I had stepped out of the department chair role when one of our assistant professors came to my now faculty office back in the far corner of the building and said, I want to talk to you about my career. It's like, we've been doing that for 4 years. And she's like, but I'm going to be honest with you now because you're not my boss, right? So it's not always your boss that is going to give you this best career development. It's whoever you feel that you can disclose to in ways that will help you advance in the ways that you want to. As the boss, I really wanted to retain faculty. I didn't want to have to hire again. I didn't want to have to replace someone. But as a career mentor, I'm much more likely to think broadly about career kinds of options. I tried to do that as a boss too. It's just a little harder. If emotional support is where you feel like you need support in the workplace, that opportunity to vent and to get support about stressful situations, then you are going to have to be honest about when you're stressed. And again, not always, right? Not in every relationship, but in the places where you feel like there's a base of trust that you're able to be honest, you can get that emotional support. And then finally, friendship requires some personal self-disclosure, right? That's the people where you're able to start sharing even more about your life. And I do think there are little pieces of this that are important. I like knowing people when they've come back and if their kids are playing soccer or if they're doing theater or if they're in chess club. My kids did a whole range of things, although they were mostly robotics kids. So I resonate with those people most, but I'm able to talk about people's interest. I had somebody in my MBA class say, I form relationships by paying attention to what people are paying attention to. And I thought that was so good. It's like, okay, what's important to you and how can I pay attention to that as well? That can be a way to find friendships. And I do think Catherine's comment in the chat points to the importance of not just the first three, which were studied in the workplace a lot, but also this idea that social connections may come from work. Right? We're at work a lot of our waking hours. Many of us identify with our work, and we're able to come and find places where there are people who care about us as individuals. That's a good situation to be in. So I think the benefits of authentic work relationships are that we are able to form relationships that give us more of these types of support. Let me pause there for a minute and ask if you have any questions or comments, things that you want to dive into. Excellent. At the end of the day, we did a lot of research to show that these kinds of support matter. And they matter in some really important individual ways and some really important organizational ways. When people were able to find these broad kinds of support in the workplace, when they were able to self-disclose and have some mutuality, they experienced being known or seen and valued. And that is a profound connector to our well-being, right? It's a basic human need to feel known and valued. It also helped with the community in the organization. So people felt a sense of belonging and they felt included. And this inclusion, I think, is especially important because it's not just about being accepted as a member of the group. It's about being accepted as a member of the group for who you are and what you bring to the group uniquely, right? And so it's easy to say, oh, we're all Hawkeyes and, you know, we all have our share of gold clothing. But if we're really accepted, not just because we're like, go Hawks, but because someone says, Amy, what you bring uniquely contributes to our community or our organization, that's a different outcome that causes people to perform well, to feel good about their work, and to stay with organizations. And in the slides, there's a live link there. I don't know if the slides will get shared out afterwards, but if so, you can click on that link and it will take you to a press release that our press office did about the research that I've been talking about so far. Flourishing at work is all about relationships. And I think that's a key point that I want to get across. All right, so let me pose another question to you and see if I can get more conversation, whether in the chat or live going. Okay, maybe you've bought into my research evidence and I could show you lots of charts and graphs and statistical results. But at the end of the day, relationships are powerful for individuals and organizations. So what are the ingredients needed for these authentic workplace relationships? When you have been able to find these, what's happening? What's the special sauce, if you will, that helps us build these authentic relationships at work and maintain them over a period of time? I love this, Keegan. Patience and consistency. Getting to know someone takes time. I completely agree with this. And that's why I think it's probably not good. I mentioned my kids are in college. They've been interviewing for jobs. And I'm like, you want to go in and be yourself? But maybe not your full self in the interview, right? I know you very well, and there's some things you probably don't want to lead with. And so we build these relationships slowly, right? And we look for people's reactions. And sometimes getting to know somebody requires lots of small connections. And that's what happens in a day-to-day setting. But having your door open, stopping by to tell somebody a funny joke, sharing a meme, asking how somebody's day is, there's so many small things that make a big difference in terms of connection. I love this. Catherine says being willing to trust. And this is one we're going to spend a fair amount of time on because I think that is the foundation. Disclosure really doesn't happen unless we have a sense of trust. And so being willing to trust is one of my key ingredients for sure. Patricia, I see your hand. Please jump on.
Yeah, I was just thinking that really it makes it a lot easier to be authentic with people if there is a physical space where you feel like you can talk. And I think in our current situation with a lot of cubicles, and you're not really supposed to talk much because you might disturb somebody else, it makes it really difficult. We used to have a really large staff lounge, and everybody would go there at break time and talk to one another about things other than work. And that really helped a lot. And we don't have that anymore.
Yes. Boy, space is powerful, isn't it? So having a space where you can get together, and it's nice if it's away from your desk. And I guess we don't use the phone so much anymore. I used to say being away from my phone, but away from my email, a space where we can just sit down and mindfully connect. I think it makes a huge difference. And so finding those small moments becomes important. It's interesting, and I want to ask your thoughts on this. Can managers, leaders, organizations script these? Like, does having departmental events, like we are now going to have coffee with the dean. This is a big thing in the College of Business. And so we'll all go to the space, and this is a time when we're informally connecting. Can you start the connection that way, or are there limitations to those more formal events? Or Zoom happy hours is something that gets my students talking miles a minute because they hated them. How do formal events work in creating some of these?
We tried something in my unit that was more informal, but it was Friday afternoon club, where the last hour of the day would bring in treats and, pop or something to drink, and we'd just sit around and talk. And I think it went well. It's kind of hard to say.
But I love that. And I mean, the FAC acronym is fabulous. Anyway, Friday afternoon club. Here's a time, here's a space. Let's not try to script it too much. Food is powerful. I think, I put the guy in the kitchen on the slide because I really do think you break bread together. There's something to be said for that. Just have some common conversation. My department goes to Catlet Dining Hall on Wednesdays, whoever is available for lunch. And I did not think going to the student cafeteria was a great idea at all until I went there. And the food is wonderful. Oh my gosh, so much better than when I was in college. And so whoever can go, and we end up talking about sometimes work, sometimes not work, whatever's on people's minds. It's just a nice touch base because our offices aren't even together. We're scattered all around the building. And so we don't always even see each other. So I think that's good too. Good. I'm looking in the chat, but also feel free to jump on if you've got other thoughts. Boy, sense of humor. If you have it, I feel like sometimes I have to be careful. I'm not that funny. And so I use other strategies. But for people who have a good sense of humor and don't take themselves too seriously, people who are curious, who are just like, I want to know about you, I think that's an incredibly powerful. Never assuming malicious intent and never having malicious intent, really important. I call this, and I've taught my kids this since they were little, generous attributions. What's the most generous reason you can give for somebody to have done something that maybe you are like, oh, that didn't feel good to me? But maybe they're really having a rough day. We never know what people are going through. And so not assuming malicious intent and not having it, I think super important as well. The best homemade personal pizzas at Catlet. So the tip that you take away, I often encourage my groups to take one thing that you're going to try and put on your to-do list to implement out of a session. It might be going to Catlet to get a pizza. That is okay. That is a valuable thing to do. It's difficult to script formal conversation events, especially with senior leadership. And I think that's true as well. So people who feel like they're being unheard, this is why I think that supervisors, the people in the middle, right, are often the people you'll have a more informal conversation with, and they can add to our sense of feeling heard. Even when senior managers have a really good intent, it's harder for them to have those kind of conversations. So I think that's important as well. Let me tell you about a few things that we know from research about keys to authentic work relationships, and this is going to line up really well with what we've been discussing. A foundation of trust. I told you we were going to focus here. I think that self-disclosing without a foundation of trust Being vulnerable, as Brene Brown would talk about, without a foundation of trust is very risky, right? But if you build a foundation of trust with someone, it's easier to be vulnerable with them. And what do I mean by trust? Here's again a textbook definition, but it's simply, are we confident in being vulnerable and acting on the words or the actions or the decisions of another person? Are we willing to open up to them? Are we willing to tell them where we're struggling? When we develop that kind of trust in the workplace, we're more likely to develop these authentic work relationships. What causes you to trust someone? That's an open philosophical question, but are there things that make you go, that's the thing, I'm going to trust this person? I'm going to open up to them because what makes you trust somebody? A feeling of connection. Yeah. And often we trust people who are similar to us a little bit more naturally. So I have this connection with you, and so therefore I'm willing to be vulnerable. Good. Other things that make you trust people. Display of kindness. Yeah. So when somebody does something, and this is, I've got 3 trust assessments up here that would fall under the benevolence, right? Somebody does something to show you that they care about you. Here's a card after you've come back from maternity leave. I've stopped by to try to cheer you up because I know you're having a hard day. Huge builder of trust in that way. When their actions match what they tell you they value, walking the talk. This is the integrity piece, right? And we start to build trust over time when we see this over and over again. The person's words match their action. Willingness to share in goofiness and weirdness. Boy, I love that kind of culture, right? When somebody is willing to meet you where you are. And for me, I'm kind of a big nerd in a lot of dimensions. That does involve some goofiness and weirdness. I'm much more likely to sense that connection that Brett talked about in his post. Good. And then ability to laugh at themselves or ourselves, right? Not taking themselves too seriously, knowing that they're willing to admit their own mistakes. But I would say, again, across the research, we look for people who are good at their jobs. We trust them on the work side. So ability, right? When somebody is consistently making good decisions, when somebody is consistently doing things that are consistent with our shared priorities, we're more likely to develop trust. But then there's these personal reasons as well. People won't care how much you know until they know how much you care, is a quote that I hear a lot from my students. And I think that resonates with them because of this need to build relationships and find benevolent relationships. And then this consistency, this integrity comes into play as well. So when you're starting out in a new relationship, you may start to trust someone based on what you know about their background, their credentials, based on what other people tell you. And then you start to have direct experiences with them, and you start to build a track record over time. And this is when trust begins to build, and you may be more willing to self-disclose at that point. So again, authentic relationships taking this time to build based on an idea that the person is going to have integrity and benevolence. Once you start to form those relationships, those connections, and start to self-disclose, and that becomes mutual, trust grows even further. And then finally, again, the repeated interactions, the consistency, the patience, and the time that it takes to do this lays that foundation of trust, which allows you to have more authentic relationships. So that's step 1. Step 2, I've put 3 things in as a category. The keys to authentic work relationships: curiosity, which got mentioned in the chat. I was so happy to see that. Mindful listening, and something that I'll refer to as generative conversations. And so I want to talk especially about those last 2, mindful listening and generative conversations. And again, in the slides, there's a link to a site that I use a lot called mindtools.com. Mindtools just has really great, short, practical tips for building connection, motivating others, all kinds of management sorts of topics. The one on mindful listening, I think, is especially good because it helps you put yourself in other people's shoes. If you're having a conversation with someone, knowing how they're perceiving you, the way that you're listening and the way that you're responding will help you build these more positive and authentic relationships. Think about a time when this has been happening for you, when you felt like somebody was really listening to you, when there was a sense of connection. What's going on in that picture in your head? What was going on in that situation that really allowed you to feel like you were being listened to, heard, seen, known, and valued? What's necessary for mindful listening? Eye-to-eye contact. Yeah. Hard to do on Zoom, right? But even if you're on a virtual meeting, if there's just the two of you and you have your cameras on, you can do signals, right? Do you see how I just leaned forward? There's a signal there that I'm really listening to you. I'm not checking the text that just came in on my watch, which is probably from one of my children, right? Because you can't leave yourself at the door. So I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking at email. I'm not multitasking, as Keegan says. I am giving you the signal that I'm really focused and I can see you. Allowing the other person to complete their thought, even though it might take a little time. This is, as my therapist would say, my growth edge personally. I like to jump in so people know I'm with them, but oftentimes that makes them feel as though they're being bulldozed over the top of, right? So sitting back, letting them complete their thought. There's some nonverbals that you can do. I'm a nodder. The students who I have in class who are nodders, I give them a higher grade than everybody else just because I appreciate that so much. No, that's not actually true, but I do appreciate it so much when people are nodders. I think that helps a lot. And so I think that there's a lot of things we can do to be present that allow us to be good active listeners. Ooh, I love the paraphrasing, actively following up. And somebody told me the other day, a colleague, and I really did like this. I've always been a fan of paraphrasing. If somebody talks, I'll say, what I heard you say is, and she said, that's good. Be careful that you're not changing their meaning, though, especially if they are having a different situation than you are, that repeating back exactly may be even better, so that you make sure that you're not changing their meaning. So I think that's important as well. But paraphrasing, I could do a whole session on asking good questions. There's something that is called by the consultant who came up with it, the awesome question, AWE, and that is, and what else? If somebody's talking to you and they're a little bit hesitant, right? They're sharing something that's hard for them and they tell you a little bit, and you can ask them, okay, I heard you say this, and what else? What else is going on for you? That question can give you a whole nother set of insights that they may have been just a little bit reluctant to share, but may have opened up. Okay, I'm glad I didn't have to interpret 01600 scanned by granola bar, because I was like, oh my gosh, my husband teaches in the College of Business, and he and I once did a career day together where he tried to teach third graders binary math. And I was like, if this is some sort of code, I'm out. I'm going to have to go get my tech experts. So good to know. I'm all in on the granola bar. Other things you do for mindful listening. I just led a faculty book club that we read a book that I loved. The book is by a Michigan professor. Her name is Sue Ashford. And it is called, how do I not have it right at the top of my head? The Power of Flexing. I do. It just was buried one layer deep. The Power of Flexing. And we read this book together over 3 months and talked a lot about it. But I can summarize Sue's basic idea for you. And that is, when you are trying to improve, especially on an interpersonal skill, doing small experiments can be really helpful. So take some time. If you're thinking, okay, I really do want to improve my mindful listening. I want to be able to connect at a deeper level with my colleagues. Take some time and generate a bunch of ideas about how you might do that. The next time I have a conversation with a colleague, I'm not going to do it across my desk. I'm going to find a space where we can sit and we're not across a desk from each other. The next time I have a conversation with my colleague, I am going to make sure to wait until there's silence before I jump in. I'm not going to interrupt. The next time I have a conversation with a colleague, I'm going to ask at least 3 questions before I jump in with my perspective, and create these small experiments and then try them, right? And you can either tell people you're trying them or you can not tell people you're trying them, and see if there are ways to improve your mindful listening to get better outcomes. But the beauty of these small experiments compared to things that we often think about when we're developing our work skills is that they can just happen in the course of your day, right? You just have to think a little bit about, and then maybe ask the person or do a little reflecting afterwards and see if that's a situation that improved your mindful listening. So I think that one is very important. I also think that generative conversations are important. And what do I mean by generative conversations? These are conversations that spark back and forth in ways that seem to take on a life of their own, that take off and allow us to feel more connected. And again, I think mindful listening helps with this. I think curiosity helps with this. I think that any time that you can disclose in ways that are reciprocated, we have these more generative conversations as well. So these authentic work relationships built on a foundation of trust, and then these repeated interactions that are characterized by curiosity, mindful listening, and generative conversations. And then we get to what I consider kind of the big 3. These are the advanced relational skills: vulnerability, empathy, and compassion. Vulnerability is when we disclose things that may put us a little bit at risk, that may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but when we're in a situation where we feel confident about doing that. And we are more likely to be vulnerable when we're met with these kind of caring, compassionate, empathetic responses. I told my MBA class, and MBA students are a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are very focused on profit and power and showing expertise. But I told them at the beginning of class that I have Parkinson's disease and explained how it might play out as a part of the class. And I got this string of things in the chat that were beautiful and supportive, and they referred to kind of how this links to the leadership principle of being vulnerable, and expressed such empathy for me that I think that it opened up. And the rest of the class, our 8 weeks together, they became more likely to disclose things that they were struggling with at work, and they were able to help each other. And so I do think there's a path that we get this beautiful upward spiral when we disclose and are somewhat vulnerable. People respond with empathy, which is a bit of a feeling, and also sometimes take compassionate action, stopping by to check on us, giving us the card or the flower, stepping in to help out and back us up. And so when I think about authentic relationships, this vulnerability, empathy, compassion is what gives me a lot of hope about workplaces that are able to develop this well, and why I think it's important to talk about this. All right, again, I'm going to pause and ask questions, comments. Please feel free to turn on your microphones, pop them into the chat. If you have an anonymous question, you can send it to Maddie and she will ask it. If not, I want to talk about one more thing that came up in our research and then some specific scenarios. We've talked a lot about the support we receive in our workplace relationships: task support, career support, getting emotional support, and friendship. There's something also very powerful for us in terms of our own well-being about the opportunity to give. And good workplace relationships are about giving as much as receiving. And I think this is so important. It came up in really beautiful ways in the qualitative interviews that we were doing, where people, especially people who are a little further along in their careers, we're to a stage where generativity becomes an important part of what we do, would reflect to us that the opportunity to give to others didn't just improve their well-being, but made their work more meaningful. They felt as though they had a deeper sense of purpose at work, when they were able to help not only the people who they considered customers or clients, but also the people they considered colleagues. And so sometimes I think we're hesitant. Everybody's plate is full, everybody is busy, but giving your team the opportunity to support each other may be the opportunity to make work deeper and more meaningful. And so I think that's important. Catherine, I see your hand. Please jump in.
I'm sure all of us have had supervisors or bosses or other types of leaders who always have to be in control, who are quick to dismiss any other person's, other people's suggestions or, constructive criticism that this may not really be the best way to go. How do you deal with a person like that? Because some people just are really hardcore, not willing to listen to anybody, no matter what, because they have something in their head, and by golly, that's the way it's going to be.
And this is a beautiful segue into three things I don't have time to dig into really deeply, but that I did want to talk about. There are factors outside of the interpersonal relationship space that influence how easy it is to form these authentic work relationships. And one of them is the work environment, and the boss or supervisor can be a big part of that. So somebody who's really not open to hearing other perspectives or to letting people be authentic and disclose. And I do think that that is a challenge when you're not in a position of power in that work group to change the dynamic. There's a couple of things that I've seen that have worked pretty well. One is a very direct approach. I also do a workshop on difficult conversations. And again, that's out there on the Tippie College of Business YouTube site. Ian Crawford, a professor colleague of mine, and I talked about that. And it would recommend sitting down with the person and explaining the impact that their style is having on you, and trying to talk through how can we change the culture in the group to improve that. It is sometimes effective and sometimes not as effective. And so the other strategy that I've seen work is for the people within the group to start to try to support one another, right? Even in the context of the supervisor who's not as good at listening, and start to have kind of a grassroots effort to change the culture of the organization. But I would say in that situation, it's difficult. We even have more extreme situations where the boss is abusive. I've done some of this work as well, or in civil, that can make people very, very reticent to self-disclose and can create a chilling effect on relationships in the workplace. Good question. Other questions? I'll talk through just these two additional considerations, and then I'll encourage you, if you have a specific scenario that you want to talk through, we'll use the rest of the time to do that. So pop it into the chat or be ready to come on and ask the question. I do think the work environment influences our relationships. There are also individual differences in how much people want to disclose, how quickly, how close they want their relationships at work to be. And so realizing that can help you understand why people may respond to you differently. I mentioned I'm married to a business analytics professor. I have two sons who, one just graduated from Iowa, one's at Drake University. They're all techie people, right? I tend to be, I'm the people. I'm the one who's like, let's talk about our feelings. Not so much with 19-year-old boys who major in computer science always. And that may be true of our colleagues as well. So again, I think meeting people where they are and recognizing that relationships may look different depending on individual differences is important. I also mentioned some research that I'm doing right now, and that is focused on what happens when we aren't getting all of our relational needs met at work. Can non-work relationships substitute? And the short answer is that we're finding partly, but not fully. So the initial data that we're collecting suggests that if you don't have someone who's emotionally supportive at work, that being able to talk to that person who's your neighbor or your friend from the coffee shop or a spouse even can help improve your work life. right? So bringing those non-work resources in can help, but you lose the opportunity as an organization to create this kind of inclusive, connected work environment that allows people to feel as though they're supported at work, which has benefits. And so I think that I heard a podcast toward the beginning of COVID that was like, we shouldn't rely on work for our relationships. It's, corporate America is limited in what we can get. And so we should just form non-work relationships. And as a scientist who has looked at the results, I would say absolutely form lots of relationships, but work relationships do serve a unique purpose as well. All right, so those are my kind of quick hits on additional considerations. Does anybody have a specific scenario that you'd like to talk through? Catherine just gave us one. That was a good example. But are there other things that you're dealing with in your context that you would like to talk through at this point? Or even just questions that you would like to raise? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute.
I was just going to ask, Amy, do you think this is a good point to stop the recording so that people might feel more comfortable, or would you like this to do that as a separate chunk?
That's a good question. I think possibly.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop it just so that way people feel a little bit more comfortable that way talking about things. So let me do that.